You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Hey everybody, thank you very much for hitting that play button. This is another episode of the Dave Bullis Podcast. I didn't include an intro in the last episode. Way too busy. I literally had minutes in the day to actually put that episode together, and I finally got it up, and I apologize, because some people actually messaged me and wondered why there was no intro track, and we're just sort of in the conversation with Melanie Wise, which is episode 146, but there's going to be one this time. I have a little more time. So here we go. It's Super Bowl Sunday. I am not watching the Super Bowl because honest to God, my team's not in it, and I have way too much to do. And like you're probably either writing a screenplay, or you're making your movie, or you're doing whatever else, so you probably won't be watching it either. But if you are, I'm going to guess, I'm going to call an upset here. I'm going to say Falcons 49, Patriots, 41. I just think that the Falcons are due this year. But again, I'm not going to be watching it because my team's not in it. But anyways, I want to talk to you also before we get to today's episode about this article that actually came up, and a lot of my friends were sharing it, and it is actually called The Hollywood That We Know Is Over. And it's a Vanity Fair article about similar themes to what I've been talking about, where a movie in a box is what I call it, where you hit a button, it writes a screenplay, you can also make maybe an animation in there, and you could produce it and you could upload it to YouTube. Because at which point, you don't even need you don't even need yourself to make it. It could just be a program on autopilot, literally just making movies. You know what I mean? You hit a button at a certain point. Here's a screenplay. Does it meet your approval? Well, does it really need to at the end of the day? Well, you could actually say, maybe you can put certain themes into it, and it'll crank it out. It'll make this movie in a 3D environment, and then you could just put it right on YouTube or wherever you want to. There's always been diversification from everybody. I know that's one of the things they were talking about with actors, how they can be replaced by 3D animation. And, now they're talking about, well, Jessica Alba's doing this. Well, Paul Newman was making his own salad dressing and stuff like that years and years ago. Francis Ford Coppola owns his own wine vineyard. Everybody diversifies because you have to. You can't stay rich doing. There's an old saying that my one business professor used to tell me, and I know I shit talk college all the time, but my one business professor, actually, he was a really knowledgeable guy, used to say, you can't get rich being diversified, but you can't stay rich not being diversified. So basically, he used to talk about investing in stocks. He put all his money in one stock, you could skyrocket. Because if I have $100 and I try to invest a little bit in here and a little bit here, even if it goes up, you're not going to get a lot of dividends off of that. But if I invest all of it into one thing, well, then I'm going to be able to pay off dividends. It'll be able to pay off dividends. And then, once I have that money, I can then cash that out and maybe reinvest in something else, and keep in a lot of different industries, because again, that stock's not going to keep rising. Even Berkshire Hathaway doesn't keep rising, even though it's about $250,000 a share right now. But I digress. So people are always going to be diversifying. Now, as we talk about AI programs writing screenplays, I've said that for years. I think that's going to happen because you know why? There are people in Silicon Valley who keep trying to mimic poetry, who keep trying to make songs by AI programs, just making their own beats, and that way a human just comes by, hits a button, and out comes a number one hit song, a pop song. And the same thing now with screenwriting, and they always talk about could you ever replace a screenwriter? And then just a studio exec could be in his office or her office, hit a button, and I now, an hour later or 5 minutes from now, I have a screenplay and I can go through it. Or I can add in certain features and certain themes, certain characters that I want, and it'll make a screenplay around that. I honestly think we're probably about 10 to 20 years away from that. For the time being, I think what they're going to try to do is do what Dan O'Bannon was talking about in his book, which is basically they're going to make just templates. And I can put all these templates into certain genres and certain pictures, and I can just make a movie off these templates. And we don't need an original screenwriter. We don't need an original director. And this also goes to the other thing I was talking about too, which is these studios which are hiring independent filmmakers who have had great success making small indie films, and they're giving them these big budget blockbusters, and they want to tell them how to do everything. Well, why the fuck you hire them in the first place? Why not just completely just get some yes men, or just get get a whole team of people and just make up a director's name like Alan Smithy, and then just, it's going to be made in a boardroom anyway. Look at Suicide Squad. By the way, speaking of that, I'm actually going to be uploading that soon. I'm just finishing up a couple of things about that. I know some people have been mentioning, where that Suicide Squad bonus episode. For those who don't know, I want to upload this bonus episode, how I would have written Suicide Squad. But back to what I was talking about. And if that does happen, and we all are making movie in a box, and the first person to hit this button is Picasso, I really wonder how art is going to be in the next couple of years. If it's even going to be worth anything, or everyone's going to be an artist, everyone can hit this button. Strange times. But here's what I recommend: just keep making your thing. Honest to God, just go out there and keep doing your thing. And if it does come along, a program that just writes screenplays for people, you could try it out. I mean, most people aren't going to like it because there's nothing to it then. There's no discovery, there's no experience. You're just basically hoping that this computer can discover these algorithms within a screenplay, because that's what computers do. They find algorithms, they do processes, and then it's going to bump something out with some validity to it. I don't know. I don't see why anybody would ever want to do that or watch that. To be perfectly honest, I mean, especially watching that. I mean, because at that point, I think everyone's going to be watching their own movies, because you're going to say, why would I even watch your stuff when I could just, we all have movie in a box. And the same thing is true with novels. I don't understand why, a computer writing a novel? Why? Who computers writing poetry? Why? I don't get any of this crap. But then again, I don't know much about anything at all. Ask any girl I've ever dated, I'm a complete idiot. But I digress. I want to hear what you have to think about this. I personally don't think it's going to turn out well. I think eventually there's going to be a backlash, and I think humans are just going to say, look, computers don't know anything about the human experience. AI, most of us, there's an article, there's an argument about whether AI will ever achieve consciousness. I don't think it ever will. I think AI is just basically going to be at a certain level. It'll get smarter in a certain way, because it'll be able to do more processes and things like that. But in terms of being able to push out, conscious activity of creativity, it's not. It's just going to be, because AI and all this big data is only as good as the data you give it. So if you keep giving it shit data, it's going to end up just producing shit. And then if you give it good data, it'll make good data. But don't give good results. But at the end of the day, I don't think that feeding an AI program a good screenplay is going to allow it to produce a good screenplay. I mean, hell, I've seen over the years people have screenwriting programs, and they have a point system, and they can tell if your screenplay is going to be a hit based upon their point system. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I don't even know where anybody would ever even be able to devise some kind of point system, because if that were the case, Disney could have just rolled with that years ago, or any other studio could have just rolled with that years ago, making a protagonist very sympathetic, or making, this has to happen on page 14, this has to happen on page 17. I think a lot of us want to have that sort of idea, is that they want to have this sort of this template, and they can put any movie in there from any genre with any cast, and it's going to be a hit. I just don't believe it. I have never seen that work. And, as we talk about screenwriting, my next guest is actually a 45-time award-winning screenwriter. And he's the founder of the popular Facebook group, Screenwriters Who Can Actually Write. We're going to talk about a lot of this stuff, including templates. And we're going to talk about his process of writing. We're going to talk about Save the Cat and all that other good stuff. What does he think about all of it? Well, why don't we all give it a listen? This is episode 147 with my guest, Mike Bierman.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Hey, Mike, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you, Mike. You're somebody that's been on my radar for a while. You're the host of the Screenwriters Who Can Actually Write Facebook group. You're a 45-time award-winning screenwriter. So, obviously you're somebody that I've wanted to talk to. And, just to get started, Mike, I wanted to ask, you're a trial attorney, by day. And I wanted to ask, when did you get bit by the screenwriting bug?
I'm actually not. I hardly ever practice anymore because between managing my daughter and doing the group actually takes an enormous amount of time. Given the number of posts I do, which you've seen, I'm sure you can understand that. I rarely practice law anymore. I'm licensed. I can practice, do all the things I used to do. I just don't do it anymore because what happens is I end up with a bunch of court dates that I can't control, scheduled out ad infinitum, out into the future. And cases can drag on for years, so rather than commit to those types of things, I'm doing something else. I try to avoid trial work, although I do still practice some entertainment law behind the scenes, including recently I've done some of that, but generally I don't practice that anymore. And the way I got started in screenwriting is my daughter, Erica Bierman, she's in Hunger Games, Catching Fire, Hunger Games, Mockingjay 1. Her scene was cut from Mockingjay 2, it revealed too much too early, but she was also in Dumb and Dumber 2. When she started, she was getting auditions, even very high-level stuff, and I'd read the scripts, and I'd say, wow, I just don't think this is written very well. I think I can do better. And so I bought the Screenwriter's Bible by David Trottier, which is one of 3 or 4 books that I recommend everybody should have. I skimmed through it. I didn't read it. Wrote a 19-page short script, submitted to Page Awards, which is top 3 contests in the world, and took top 25 scripts out of something like 7,000 scripts. So just self-taught and started off with a bang.
So the first screenwriting book that you ever bought was actually David Trottier's book. Was that correct?
Yes, and it's a great book. It's a really good overview to screenwriting. There are other books that I like for different purposes, but that's a great first book. It's hard to imagine a better first book to start with, and Dave Trottier is actually a member of the group. So I highly recommend that book. And while we're on books, I also highly recommend Linda Aronson's The 21st Century Screenplay, which is all about different structures, non-3-act, all types of different jumping time structures and very complex structures. And it's a great book because you can actually figure out what structure would best suit your story idea. If you know what you're doing when you start writing, you can custom pick a structure that would be the best skeleton to flesh out for your story. So that's an incredible book. Very, very complicated. She's a very high-level writer. She's from Oxford University. A very meaty book, and it's one you can spend a lot of time with. For formatting, I like Your Cut 2 is Showing by T.J. Alex, which is a pen name. I know people who know who that is. I haven't bothered to ask. But that's the best book for formatting. It goes into the most depth. Any given situation, there are typically 3 to 5 professional, acceptable ways you can choose from to do it. And that is an essential book for screenwriters. Richard Toscan also wrote Playwriting Seminars 2.0, which is mostly about playwriting because he was dean of theater at USC for I think about 30 years, a very long time. But that book also crosses into screenwriting, and it's an excellent book that breaks down the analysis of story, whether it's playwriting or screenwriting. And so those are 4 books that I highly recommend.
It's funny, Mike, because the first book I ever read about screenwriting was also David Trottier's book about formatting. I went into a Borders, and remember them when they were still around? But I went into...
Yeah, I was sad when they went away.
Yeah, because now all that's left is Barnes and Nobles and maybe a few independent stores here and there. But it's sad to see that part of it go.
Yeah, the brick and mortar bookstores are they're really enjoyable because you can browse and there's a certain atmosphere and you can kill a few hours and find things you have no idea exist. The internet's great, but there's a certain allure to a brick and mortar bookstore, and hopefully those will come back. I should have mentioned also that Rick Toscan, that I just spoke of, who I think recently got a Lifetime Achievement Award from, I guess, National Endowment of the Arts. He's actually in the screenwriting group as well. So we have some really high-end gurus in there, lots of pros, well over 100 produced films you've heard of, written by members of the group. So thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, there are some members of the group that I've seen their posts about different things that they've written that have been produced. For instance, I know somebody just wrote the screenplay for the latest Steven Seagal movie, and I remember he was in the group, and I was talking to him briefly. I think that's is that Charles or Chuck? I think his name is.
It's Chuck Hustmeyer.
Yeah.
That's end of the gun, and he has. I think he actually has another film coming out on that same deal with the same producer, not starring Steven Seagal. I know more about it, but I can't say at this point. That info's under wraps. But what I just told you is fine. He does have another film under that deal, and I think he's either optioning or about to sell another script imminently. So we have a lot of activity. I have 2 feature films in production myself right now, so there are a lot of people in the group with a lot of things going on. Some really great stuff.
So that's why the name fits so well. Screenwriters who can actually write and not just talk about theory, right?
Right. Well, there's a certain haughtiness and snottiness to it. I'm the first to admit it, and I actually did that on purpose because in reviewing screenwriting groups, there's one group in particular. It's just enormous. I won't name it, but it has nearly 20,000 members, and the type of questions asked in that group are just mind-boggling. The lack of thought going into posting a question with your name on it before you put it up, it's just incredible. I think when I started the group, in my group description, I named it kind of sarcastically because I was leaving the other group just in disgust and wanted to try and get people who were, if not more experienced, a little bit more thoughtful about what they were writing and what they were saying, a little more educated people in the craft. And so I think I posted, screenwriting forum, hopefully without questions like, is water wet and is it okay to kill my character? So the whole thing kind of started out as a sarcastic announcement of a departure from kind of like the great unwashed, with people saying, I'm a screenwriter because they wrote something on a napkin once, to try to attract people, even beginners, but people who are more serious about learning the craft, who are looking at it as a profession rather than as a hobby.
Yeah, it's I've joined other groups in the past as well, and some of these questions, there was way too many questions about formatting, and for instance, there was actually a group that met physically here in Philadelphia, and the beginners who would show up would always ask about formatting, and what I said
buy
was,
a book, buy a book. I mean, read a script, buy a book. It's just not that tough, and unfortunately, sorry to cut you off there, but unfortunately, that is all too common in a lot of screenwriting groups. And one of the rules, I have a rules-driven group for this purpose, to try and keep the group on focus, and no political posts, and there are a bunch of other rules. But one of the basic tenets of the group is search the group itself before you ask a question, because people been in there for over a year, answering in depth almost anything you can think of. And also, search the internet before you ask a simple formatting question. Buy a book. It's just not that tough. And so all you're going to do by asking that type of question in an open forum is attract ridicule, show you have no idea what you're doing, and get a bunch of troll responses. So you'll actually never get the right answer, because even the people giving you the right answer will be diluted by all the trolls. So, and that's very common, as you know.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. You know, when people would ask that in the group, in the physical group, I'd always say to the other person that was running it with me, I'd say, why don't we take these people, put them in their own group, and we can go over like formatting, and then the other half of the group, you know, we'll work on actual, you know, writing and get into the structures and all that. And we kept going back and forth on this, and I said, because every meeting we're sacrificing our strongest for our weakest. And what I mean by that is, you know,
exactly.
Yeah, just you know, spending all this time on formatting when you could buy fade in or final draft or writer's duet or whatever, and it takes care of it all for you, or you know, like you said.
Well, no. There's a little bit of a misconception. It takes care of the. There's a difference between formatting and element placement on the page, and this is a common misunderstanding, or people misstate this. The screenwriting software, there isn't any screenwriting software that actually formats per se for you. What the screenwriting software does is it actually puts the elements in place on the page so that you don't have to work in Word counting spaces. For example, if you're going to do a parenthetical under dialogue, the screenwriting software will position the cursor in the right place for, you know, a play format or screenwriting format for character or shot or transition or dialogue, action, note, special, whatever it is that you're trying to do. It'll actually set it up on the page for you with the right number of preceding, following, and intervening carriage spaces and intervening carriage returns. But what it actually doesn't do is format. And so that's one of the things that happens in beginning groups a lot. And I've seen professional scripts where people actually said, when I was script doctoring or rewriting a script, I'd say, hey, you know, this is going to be a lot more work than you thought. Well, why is that? Is the story bad? Well, the story's okay. The problem is the formatting, everything's off. Well, that's impossible. I used final draft. Well, that's a very naive comment that shows how many screenwriting formatting errors there are going to be, because the software doesn't actually format. It just puts things in the right place. The formatting is the understanding of how to direct the camera without using shot direction, for example, in a spec script, and how to properly write down the entire skeleton of a visual film in writing using as few words as possible, leaving as much white space on the page as possible. And screenwriting software is just the beginning. It's kind of like saying, I have a Ferrari, so now I'm going to be a champion driver. There's an enormous difference between having the car and being able to drive it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, because you actually touched upon what I was going to say was there were people who had Microsoft Word open and they were using like 4 tabs for a character, 3 tabs for this.
It's brutal.
Because they would turn in a script and I would look at this and I'd go, it's all off. And I'd say, what did you write this in? And that's what I'm saying. You know, the screenwriter, because they would always say, well, Dave, you know, how do we write this? Blah blah blah. And I'd say, no, you just use, you know, grab the software. That's what I mean about, you know, buying Final Draft or whatever and having
that positions the elements correct.
Yeah, that.
And then the other thing beginners don't understand is, you know, they'll go out and pick Helvetica or, you know, I don't even know the names of all the fonts, crazy fonts, swirls, and, you know, H.P. Lovecraft fonts, and okay, that stuff's great if you're writing a free verse poem or something, but screenwriting is designed for every page to be 1 minute of screen time. Now, obviously, depending on action, depending on dialogue, the level of vocabulary, the way the script's written, each page is going to vary, obviously. If you have an enormous amount of action, tightly written action, a page could go conceivably several minutes. But if you write, there's a 2-mile car chase down the dirt road, that's not going to happen in 1 minute, okay? Mm-hmm. So the page length for filming can vary, but the whole idea is, on average, one page is 1 minute of film. Now, the only way you can do that, if you think about it, is if you have a particular font style, which is called a fixed pitch font. And the standard for that is Courier, which is an old news font. I find it a fairly ugly font, but they've developed all kinds of variant Courier fonts. So there's, Courier Final Draft. They've patented their own. There's Courier New, Courier Dark, which is one I really like. And there are a bunch of other variants of Courier, and what it comes down to is no matter what character you type, whether it's a special character, $, hashtag or pound sign, exclamation point, period, comma, capital P, small x, it doesn't matter. Whatever character you type, they all take up exactly the same amount of space on the page. And that's why you have to use a fixed pitch font. And some people will try to cheat. Let's say you're a novelist and you're overwriting your script and you want to get it down from 165 pages to 120 where somebody might actually read it. And you can't figure out any way to do it because you're overwriting everything. You're too green to rewrite your script properly. So what you do is you get the bright idea to go in and change the font to some font other than Final Draft. Go ahead and add a couple lines, one top, one bottom, cheat the margins left and right, and all of a sudden your page count drops down to 130 pages and you're within striking distance of your goal. The problem is any professional looking at a single page of your script will immediately throw in the trash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, that's something that I've also seen too, especially on the cover page. Like they'll use like a different font for the title, and like in all those specialized fonts, and
some artwork thrown down the margins, and in spec scripts. I actually have a book coming out, being published by Dose Blant Publishing, and it's going to be called. It's coming out fairly shortly. I'm essentially finished with the manuscript, the body of it. I'm working on the some of the pictures, clearing copyrights, things like that. But the book's going to be called Secrets of Screenwriting, with a subtitle of collected essays. I don't want anyone to think that this is like any of the other screenwriting books. It really isn't. It's a collection of my long essay posts from the group over the last year, and it's kind of a rambling, disordered volume full of all kinds of pearls of wisdom that just occurred to me from a post or someone's comment or something. I would pull out my phone and write these gigantic, sometimes 5- and 6-page posts. They probably have a mental problem. I don't know why I do it, but I do. And a lot of people asked me to collect those, or they wanted me to archive them somehow so they could reference them. Several pros have used my rewriting post, which is very popular. It's about 6 pages long. One pro actually printed it out and glued it onto the wall above his computer. Messaged me to tell me how useful it was. And I have a copyright post people tend to like. Screencraft published part of that copyright post, and I'm going to publish the whole thing in the book with Screencraft's permission. They've already given me permission to republish the whole, but that should be useful. I've kind of lost track of where I was, but there's a plug for the book.
Yeah, do you know when that book's coming out, Mike?
Well, I'm under contract to get it out in the next, I think I've got 60 days or so to get the manuscript in. That's not a problem because the manuscript's essentially finished. And then the publisher has to publish it within 6 months. So, and we're shooting for Barnes and Noble, the brick and mortar stores. I guess there'll probably be a hardcover version and the standard paperback type version. We suspect it'll be oversized, probably a 5x8 or 5x9. It's probably going to be about 260 pages, and it won't be like any other. It won't be like Trottier's Guide or anything like that. That'll be fully indexed, where you can go in and say, gee, I have this particular question. I want to look. This is more of different subjects, the philosophies behind different ways of writing story, things like that. It's more essay form rather than subject-driven like a lot of books. So it'll be very different. It's more the kind of the book you sit down in a coffee shop and read it to get. It's kind of like a mixture of opinion and method and things like that. So it'll be very different.
Oh, very cool. Because I have a ton of screenwriting books, and this does sound very different than all the rest that I have. Obviously, because this is a podcast, you can't see it, but next to me is my library of screenwriting books.
Nice.
But it does sound.
Well, that's just smart. I mean, this is a very esoteric craft. It's a very closed industry. A lot of the really good screenwriters either don't have the time to help or don't want to help. And I've actually seen sabotage in groups. I won't name any of them, but I've seen professional or advanced writers who actually get paid all the time to write, giving wrong answers on purpose to throw off either someone they don't like or somebody that, they just decided to screw with. And of course, that doesn't help anybody except the pro who's keeping down the competition. So opinions are going to vary in screenwriting books, and I have my own very strong opinions. My book is going to be full of them. It's going to be full of cursing. It's not edited. It will be edited, but the language won't be edited out. Sometimes if I'm angry about something, I'll flavor the post with a sprinkling of cursing because that's just how it came out. To keep the book genuine, the posts are actually going in as the original essays. They're not being edited down to make it politically correct or anything like that. So the book will offend some, it will amuse some, and it should help everyone that reads it.
And that's fantastic. Sometimes we need a little tough love, Mike. And
that's what the book is. I'll yell at you, I'll prop you up, I'll beat you down, then I'll lift you up again, and I'll inspire you to write better and to keep going, and then I'll beat on you a while for doing something a certain way that's not a very effective or good or smart way, and then I'll build you up again. So it's kind of a tough ride, but enough people approached me to write it and said, geez, you need to put all these things in a book. These are terrific. That a publisher actually approached me to publish the book. So kind of a nice situation.
Yeah, it is an amazing situation, and sometimes we need that tough love. Just a funny anecdote, Mike, I think that you'll really enjoy. I one time had a beginner approach me with a script, and they came into one of my groups that I was running, and their script had several pages within the script with design drawings on them of what they were talking about inside the script.
It's not good, and it doesn't. It doesn't matter if they're Picasso, and it doesn't matter if they're Hemingway. Those things are not a good combination for a spec script. If you're hired by somebody at DreamWorks who's absolutely visually driven, and you've already got the job, and they see you doodle in the margins and say, geez, what a great drawing, I sure would like to see some of those in your script, by all means, throw some artwork in the script. But in a regular spec script, you don't do that. You don't put artwork in. Every rule is made to be broken. One of my most award-winning scripts, it doesn't have artwork in it per se, but I do some interesting things with a couple of different fonts that are cut in as JPEGs. One of the languages that the script is written in is Galilean Aramaic, which was a language spoken in the early Middle East, which ended not too long after Jesus' time. That's one of 7 languages in the script. Well, there's no font for that, so I actually had to cut JPEGs into the script to put in the original Galilean Aramaic, which actually mattered because at one point the language actually appears on the screen as a special effect. So to save producers the 4 months it took me to get 4 or 5 words. Let me see. 4 words took 4 months to get translated by one of the world's experts in this language. So to save producers time, if anyone picked up the script, I went ahead and had the translation already done and put in the script. So, rules are made to be broken, but you need to learn the rules and get good so you can decide when you need to break them. I've never put artwork per se in a script, and I'm up to, 13 features with 8 solely written, and then others co-written with best-selling authors and people like that. And I had one person that wanted to put artwork in the script, and I had a very frank talk with them, and I said, look, you came to me, you want me to write this with you, I like the idea, I like the story. If you insist on putting artwork in the script, you're going to write it alone. And that was it, and no artwork.
And that's something I want to get into, Mike, is, your screenwriting, your methods. And, so when you were starting out, you had David Chartier's book, and obviously, you were reading, you said you skimmed through that and you were writing down your own ideas. And so I wanted to ask, did you ever adhere to any sort of like method, whether it be 3 acts, 5 acts, any of that when you were writing, or did you just simply you had a starting point and you just went?
Okay, so 3-act, and basically didn't read the book, just looked at the book for formatting, hadn't read any professional script that, like of any movie that I liked, just had seen a bunch of scripts that I didn't think were written well that had been sent to my daughter. There were some that were written well. They were, by all means, someone researches this. Oh, she auditioned for that. Mike said the script is crap. Now, some of the scripts were crap. A lot of them were just mediocre. So, and I'm unusual in that I don't outline, and most writers do outline. There are just a few, I would say maybe less than 4%, probably closer to 2%, don't outline. I don't know if I want to call it a gift or if it's a curse. Most writers will actually execute a complete, fleshed-out outline that may be 30, 40, 50, 60 pages before they write the screenplay, and they'll actually write it from the outline. I have never done that, and I write natively, but I also have developed my own trademark writing method that a lot of even pros have commented publicly. They said that it's helped them a lot, and a number of them are adopting it. I call it BAM, which is the Bierman asynchronous method. And with BAM, what I do is I almost always write the end first, and sometimes I'll write the beginning first, but it's always either the beginning or the end, and then I write the other end of it, whether it's the beginning or the end. So I always start with the beginning and end when I start a script, and frequently the very first thing that I will do is write the end and fade out the end, and it'll be the first scene I write. That's very common for me. Then I'll go back and write the beginning, and then typically what I do is I will tie scenes into the beginning and end scene, the first and last by definition, and I will work backward from the outside in, which sounds strange until you try it and see what it does. I will tie, I might write the end, then I'll write the beginning, then I'll write the second scene of the screenplay, then I'll go write 3 scenes back from the end. I'll jump back and write, the third scene at the beginning, and then I'll know that I need a particular second act scene or a break, and I'll go in and I'll write that, and I'll just float it in the middle of final draft or writer duet, which is what I use now. I'll just float it in there, and I will then write whatever scene occurs to me that I'm inspired to write that I know needs to be written at the time, and I fit them all together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I attach them to the anchors, which are both ends, and as I develop scenes in the middle, when I know I have 2 scenes, sorry, it's a long answer. When I know I have 2 scenes that are going to stick together, I won't put any asterisks between them. I use like 3 asterisks when I'm floating a scene. And I'll pull the asterisks out when I tie 2 scenes together, and I know that nothing will go between those scenes. And then they may still be floating somewhere in the second or third act, somewhere in the middle of the script, and I just build the whole script that way. When I write the last scene, it's almost always a second act scene somewhere in the middle of the script, and I write it, rewrite that scene, and I'm done. Because I also rewrite as I go. So then the whole thing only needs to be skimmed for continuity and for proofing errors. That method is a method that I developed on my own and gave a name to because people wanted to know how I was writing. A lot of people who said it sounds crazy tried it, and they absolutely love it. What it does is it prevents writer's block. If you're writing from the beginning of a script, scene by scene, and you know where you're going, you may have a bunch of things you already know you want to write, but you can't link it up because you get stuck earlier on. With my method, you never get stuck. If you don't know what you're going to do next for a second, you just jump ahead and write the next thing you know you're going to put in, even though it may not be connected to what you just wrote. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes sense, Mike.
And so I've had several pros. You know, one guy 18 produced movies, another guy 20 produced movies, another guy 6 produced movies. They've actually all used it, come back and said, "My God, this method is wonderful. I don't know why I haven't used this before. I never thought of it. I've never seen it before." David Silverman, who is the creator of the Wild Thornberries, actually just recommended and endorsed this method and said it was genius. So that's kind of nice. The interesting thing is I haven't had anybody give it an honest try after understanding the method, which I describe in my upcoming book. I haven't had anybody give it an honest try and say that it didn't work for them. I've had a number of people who've refused to try it. Geez, that's scary. I can't imagine it. But I've never had anybody who actually sat down and gave it a good try who didn't benefit from it. So then that just developed, again, from learning to write my own way. I didn't go to film school. I wasn't a film major. I wasn't a screenwriting major. I don't have an MFA in screenwriting. I just did it on my own. And it works for me. It works for a lot of other people. And interestingly, it works for people who outline and for people who don't outline. Because all of the writers that I just mentioned, with 20 and 18 and 6 movies and the Thornberry's creator, they all outline extensively. One of them is just an absolutely encyclopedic outliner, and the method still worked for him. So just kind of made sense to me, and I started writing that way.
You mentioned beating writer's block. I think that is that's something that I've dealt with too, Mike. Is at first I thought it was writer's block, and I realized what I think it was decision fatigue. And what I mean by that is you start your screenplay from the beginning. So here we are, Act 1, page 1, and we start to sort of write this.
The dangerous and deadly, scary blank white page.
Fade in interior,
right?
But
it was a dark and stormy night. Oh damn, I'm stuck.
It's kind of like that movie Throw Mama from the Train. Billy Crystal keeps writing that same sentence, and he can't figure out where to go next. And so and it's basically decision fatigue, where you realize, oh my God, this screenplay could go in like 10,000 different directions. And there was actually a book I was reading about this, the same sort of principle of decision fatigue, and obviously it could go in 10,000 different directions. And his argument was, if you actually go back to the theme and the whole the main tension and everything of your screenplay, there really probably isn't 10,000 ways you could go. Really, it has to all tie in together, so that way scene 1, we're not we're on an island, and then scene 2, all these other different things are happening that have never been established. If you get what I'm trying to say.
I do. And what the decision fatigue problem that you've labeled and that you've designated is a very common problem. And the BAM method, what I just said, you can see immediately how that prevents it from happening. If you know the end, you know where you're going. So by definition, every single scene you write is going to do one of 3 things. It's either going to develop character, or it gets thrown out. Or it's going to advance the plot, or it gets thrown out. Or the holy grail of a scene is it develops character, reveals character, deepens character, and advances the plot. That's what you should aim for in every single scene. if you write a scene that doesn't do any of those things, throw it out. Kill your baby because it's not getting you to where you need to be. And because budgets are determined by page count, and whether your screenplay is picked up and produced or not may very well depend on what your page count is. If you can tell story A in 90 pages, or you can tell story A in 110 and you can't get it down from 110, story A 90 pages is much more likely to get made than 110, because line producers and people who determine how much a movie is going to cost to make, they will assign, depending on genre, style, a bunch setting, costume requirements, things like that, locations. They'll figure out special effects, CGI, it goes on and on. They'll figure out a per cost page on average of the screenplay. They'll multiply that out, and they'll say, okay, to make this movie, it's going to cost us 110 times whatever that page cost is. That's going to end up being a lot higher than what 90 times whatever the page cost is, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you can write the same story, tell the same story more efficiently in fewer pages, even if nothing changes. I've rewritten scripts for people. I did a rewrite for Creative Artists and Untitled Entertainment package project, and the original script was, I think, I haven't looked at this in a long time. It was a couple of years ago. The original script was somewhere around, it was 112 pages, and they wanted it to be 100 pages before it went to budgeting. They wanted 100. They didn't want 112. So one of the first things I was asked to do was reduce the page count. So when I rewrote the script, not only did I told them, I said, I think I can hit 100 pages. They said, that would be great. That's what we had in mind. We'd love that. So I actually hit 99 and a half pages, which is 100 pages, okay? 99, go to the 100th page halfway down. So I hit the goal, but not only did I do that, I filled 5 major plot holes, and I added a whole new story arc. So I was able to make the story more complex, more complete, get rid of problems, and still knock 12 pages out of the thing. And so that's a successful rewrite, and they were very happy with it. So I kind of forgot how we got here, but this is, again, why you have a goal post in mind. You don't wander off and get lost. Now, see how I found my way again. If you know the end, everything that you write is going to be advancing your characters, your plot, moving all of the things you've created toward that end. If you know where you're going, you don't stumble and get lost. You always move toward that goalpost. There are going to be a lot of choices on the way that you're going to have to make, but those choices are now narrowed and focused by the fact that you know where you're going. A lot of people who overwrite don't have an ending in mind, and they'll wander this way and that way, and they'll end up having 5 or 8 or 10 scenes that don't contribute to where they eventually end up. And it happens all the time. I read somebody wrote a comment yesterday, gee, I just finished my screenplay and I hate it. I hate my own screenplay. It's not what I set out to write. I don't know how I got here. I don't like the ending. I don't like the story, and it's not what I intended. So now I've got to do a page 1 rewrite. That's because you didn't know where you were going.
Yeah, one piece of advice years ago that I heard from the writer of Fight Club, Chuck Palahniuk, he actually
terrific writer.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. He gave me the advice that he's like, write your beginning. He goes, write, whatever opening, whatever you want to do, and then he says, go to your last page, whatever that might be, and he goes, just write the end. And he said, what you're going to do is, because it's going to feel complete if you do it this way. He said, then what you're going to, so that way, again, like you just said, it was a goal, and that's what he also, told me a couple years ago, was that it's a goal, and that way at least, what you're going towards, and that way,
Correct. So he has a similar. I didn't know he said that, but he has a similar philosophy to what I do, and it sounds like he starts off writing the same way. And by the way, you should note, I do that whether my screenplay is linear or nonlinear. It doesn't matter. I write the screenplay non-linearly even if it's going to be a linear form. So let's say it's a straight 3-act, second act break, page 23, if it's going to be a straight 3-act screenplay, and it has a linear plot without flashbacks, without jumping around, nothing fancy, just a simple, straight story. And that could be anything from a family film to a military film. You can do anything that way. The subject matter doesn't matter. It's just how you choose to write it time-wise. You can use my form, and I do use the form to write linear screenplays. I just don't write them in order. I write the whole screenplay out of order, but when you end up reading the screenplay, it's in order. And it also works for nonlinear methods. If you're writing something like Fight Club's nonlinear, if you're writing something that jumps around and you have an unreliable narrator and he may or may not be crazy and he may or may not be who you even think he is, you can still use that method and jump all over the place and write the screenplay that's going to be nonlinear and write it in a nonlinear fashion, which sounds very chaotic but actually makes sense when you're doing it. So as I always say, if you know where you're going and you know where you're coming from, you have a nice defined world that you're working within. You're not going to start writing, crazy stuff about Mars in your story about, the kids starting school in a new school district because the parents got divorced. All of a sudden you're writing about Martians on Mars, right? And you're having a space shootout because you had no idea where you were going with your screenplay. And I've actually seen crazy stuff like that. I'm sure you have too. People end up with like 3 different stories in one screenplay. They get horribly lost, and then they get back to writer's block. I don't know what to write next. Yeah, because you jacked the whole thing up. You got yourself in a jackpot. You've written yourself into a corner, and nobody would know what to write next because none of it makes any sense. So, learn a writing method and stick to it. Like I said, my method works for me. It's worked for everyone I know that's tried it who's gotten back to me on it. But you need to learn to write in a consistent method that works for you however you write, and stick to that, develop that method, and make it work for you. Chuck has his own method that's apparently similar to mine, and I think that's a very smart method. It's funny, I admire that writer. Maybe that's why I like him so much, because we write in a similar convention. I don't know.
Great minds think alike, right? So,
well, that's what they say.
Because just to continue with what you were just saying about no writer could fix a screenplay that has all those problems because there's no goal, there's no sort of central narrative to it.
Right.
I remember when I read a screenplay years ago, and it was this guy had this idea for this like anthology. A horror movie trilogy, and I read the first part of it, the first screenplay. I read all 100 and some odd pages, and literally it was about these 2 vampires who live in like this old mansion or something that has all these catacombs underneath it, and it's just about like, it's almost like
we haven't seen that one before.
And it's just all these different people, like groups of people go in there and they're getting killed. There's no goal. There's nothing. Like literally,
there's no story.
Exactly.
There's no plot. And unfortunately, I'm hearing a lot of reports of this from screenplay contest, screenwriting contest judges, that they're seeing a lot of screenplays that have essentially no purpose. There's no story being told. Okay, I get it. It's slasher genre, and we're going to see a whole bunch of blood, a whole bunch of people killed. And then all of a sudden we decide that's enough and we stop the movie. But it never tells a story. That's not screenwriting. That's just dribbling out garbage. And this is what happens when you have an unfocused person writing that doesn't know why they're writing or where they're going. You end up with something like that. A lot of writer's block also, jumping quickly back to that as it ties in here, is if you have problems in your opening, in your first act, and the first act is unfocused, not set up right, not structured right, you really don't have any idea why you're writing, and that'll be very apparent to the reader very quickly, by the way. You don't know why you're sitting down and writing to tell this story. that is going to cause you massive writer's block, because if the first act is poorly structured and poorly set up, everything that comes after, it's like dominoes. It's like Jenga or jackstraws or any of these things. If you set the foundation badly, there's no way the house will stand. I even have a post written on this and write about making an analogy to, building a house. Don't build a house on sand. Okay, build it on rock. I have a whole essay on this, and it's all about first act structure and knowing what you're doing in the first act, because that sets up the entire story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Like they say, if you have like second or third act problems, you have first act problems, really.
Correct. And again, most of those problems can be solved by knowing the beginning and the ending right when you start. But David Silverman, I just mentioned, the Wild Thornberrys creator, wrote it was very gracious, and he wrote a recommendation for my book that'll be on the front inside or back cover. I don't know where it's going. There are a bunch of recommendations to fit. And he said that using this particular method, you end up with a much twistier, surprising plot with all kinds of fresh takes on things that isn't stale, that may even surprise the writer by writing using a different method. You end up with something that may even surprise you. It doesn't surprise you in that you have the beginning and the end, but how you get there can vary, as I said. And so you may discover some ingenious twists and things along the way, but you always know where you're going. So there are a bunch of different ways to tell the story, and the details may vary of what is going in the story, the different moral lessons and the different challenges that characters face, the internal and external challenges. No story works if the protagonist is perfect, okay? We work with flawed characters, and some of the best stories are told from the most damaged, flawed characters. And the story, as they get the external challenges, you look at how their internal character reacts to that, and you see the character's character arc, which can be learning, improvement, change is the mechanism that drives the character arc. Or you can have, some characters will go through some things, sociopathic characters, other damaged characters, and they may actually not have a character arc. The Sicario, which I really like, evokes strong reactions. Some people don't like the film because they think Emily Blunt's character, the agent, the FBI agent she plays, doesn't have a character arc. I argue that she does have a character arc. Without getting too far into spoilers, she's completely by the book and incorruptible at first, and then at the end, when faced with her own death, because she's going to go forward and reveal, by the book, reveal all the criminal and sketchy things that were done, that Josh Brolin's character, very much the CIA guy, wants her to say everything went by the book to cover up all the things they did. In the end, to save herself, she falsifies a document to save her own life. So my argument has always been she does have a character arc. She changes from the incorruptible, perfect, if you will, agent, the idealized agent, and she changes to somebody who, to save herself, falsifies a report of what happened. So, but anyway, you start with damaged characters and you move them through the story, and that's the story arc. That's why we're entertained, is because we get to see change in a character. If you have a character that, is waterproof and bulletproof and, nothing ever happens to them, which I've always felt was a big danger with Superman, by the way. That's why there's kryptonite, right?
Yeah.
Because if he has no faults, he has no weakness, what are we going to do for a story? You develop the ultimate badass Marvel superhero that can't be touched, that nothing can ever happen to them, like the Silver Surfer. There's really not a whole lot you can do with that character, and that's why the surfer had limited appearances and things. You look at somebody like Deadpool, who's a very, very damaged character, who may or may not even be sane, and Marvel finally, Ryan Reynolds fought 10 years to make Deadpool, and they insisted on, the script being genuine to the source material, and Marvel was very worried because it's, totally not PC, and it's dirty and filthy, and he curses, and he has sex, and he does all kinds of bad things that heroes shouldn't do, and that makes him fascinating. And that's why Deadpool killed it at the box office. I honestly believe it was probably my favorite movie of the year. It's probably not going to win any Oscars, maybe special effects, who knows. But entertainment-wise, I thought it was a terrific film because you had such a flawed character, and it was just so entertaining to watch him go through all that. So.
Yeah, and I also agree, Mike, that the reason I liked it was because it was so different than all the other superhero movies that are coming out. Obviously, it didn't take itself too seriously. It was completely different. It was a complete 180 from all the other superhero movies that were coming out. And I think that's why I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, they break the fourth wall all the time. He turns and looks at the camera and goes, gee, would a superhero really do this? And there's a fourth wall break within a fourth wall break, and they constantly pull the audience in, and those are things that were pretty much, although even in Greek theater and Roman theater, those are things, the aside where the actor turns and talks to the audience. Okay, those are things that have always been in storytelling. In modern screenwriting, they were pioneered by Shane Black, of course, with the Shane Blackisms. Mm-hmm. One of the most famous being, he's describing a mansion, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly, but he'll say, he's describing the place, and he stops, and he says, look, guys, basically, and he's writing like this in the script, look, guys, basically, this is exactly the kind of place that you would buy if you hit the lottery, and you had millions and millions of dollars, and you wanted to throw great parties for all your friends. This is the shit you would buy. And he puts that in the script. Mm-hmm. So Deadpool did much the same kind of thing. When I sat through the opening of Deadpool, by the time they finished writing the credits, calling the director an overpaid tool and the writers, the real heroes here and all, I was fully satisfied with the price I paid for the movie just getting through the opening credits.
Also, Mike, you mentioned Shane Black. I saw that you actually were able to meet Shane Black. Was that at a writers' conference?
That was at Austin Film Festival, so I had a script called Needles, which is an allegorical diabolical thriller that I found myself talking about a lot because people are curious about it, and that's how I went to Austin. I wasn't going to go, and the director of Austin, Matt D., called me, I think, a couple times convincing me to go because apparently my script was going to finish pretty high. Frank Darabont, director of Shawshank Redemption, Walking Dead creator, and a bunch of other stuff. He'd picked Needles top 10. Of course, I didn't know this at the time, but he'd picked it top 10 scripts for the Science Fiction Award and top 10 scripts for the Horror Prize out of 8,627 scripts. So when you do really well at some of these film festivals like Austin, I made the top group where I got to have, secret meetings in special places with great people that nobody else could go to. And those meetings often had, 20, 30, 40 people, that's it, from the whole film festival, whereas people who wrote scripts that did decently but finished lower, they'd be in a room full of, hundreds of people. And so I ended up in a room, a very small room, size of a small dining room, maybe a little bigger, with Shane Black and a whole bunch of high finishers, and he was taking questions. So everybody was kind of shy, and I think I asked the first question. I'm not shy. I jumped up and I asked him about it was something about working with Robert Downey Jr. and Val Kilmer. Their methods are very different, and what was going on in Robert Downey Jr.'s life, which I won't rehash here at the time, and got to ask him one-on-one questions right there, which I think they actually put on a podcast or on the radio, which is kind of cool. But he had actually auditioned my daughter for a film, and her audition went straight to him, and he really liked her. And we went back and forth on a couple roles on that. Ultimately, we didn't finish one of the auditions. We chose not to do, but I was a terrific guy, very, very generous guy with his time, and just extremely gracious to other writers. So,
I
got some great pictures with him. I can prove it happened.
Well, that's how I actually saw it too. I saw you met him because it was when you were on John Fallon's podcast. I actually saw that's one of the photos he added was you and Shane Black, and I wanted to make sure I asked you that, Mike, because Shane Black is. I don't think there's a screenwriter alive right now who doesn't envy or look at Shane Black as sort of like a guide in one way or another.
Well, I mean, he's a pioneer. He's a guy that did something that, in modern times in screenwriting nobody had done, and he did it with dash and bravado, and he nailed it. So he's a guy much to be admired. I also met Terry Rossio, who was just absolutely incredible guy, and he was very, very funny. And we were standing outside in front of the hotel, and I asked him if I could get a picture, and a lot of people walking by him had no idea who he was, and so he went walking by me, and my ears pricked up, and I said, "Holy smokes, there he goes!" And so I went out, politely introduced myself, and he said to I don't know if it was his driver or somebody that was hanging out with him, he said, "I like this guy. Let's take about a dozen pictures." And he turns to me and he starts to direct a scene. he says, "Okay, we're just a couple guys hanging out talking here. There's a strange accident or happening in the distance, and all kinds of weird stuff is going on." So we start acting like we're watching this. Of course, he was much better at it than I was. And I got like a dozen pictures of us making stupid faces and kind of grabbing onto each other and going ooh and on. He's just hilarious and just a terrific guy. And I met John Lee Hancock, and I met with the Blind Side. I met Andrew Kevin Walker, who that was great to meet him.
Yes, Screenwriter 7
and The Game, and and those are a couple of my favorite movies. So the evolution of Seven. Anyone who aspires to be a screenwriter really needs to read the story of Seven and what he went through, as a Tower Records clerk, trying to get anybody interested in this thing. He finally gets an agent on the phone, starts talking as fast as he can and spitting stuff out, and the agent doesn't hang up on him, actually is interested, starts asking him questions, agrees to read the script, and then boom, all of a sudden it takes off from there. But, all the time to get to that lucky break, and then director after director had him rewrite the script. The original script had the head in the box ending, which was, shocking to the studios. It's just absolutely amazing ending. And, that's too much. We need to rewrite it. So they kept having him rewrite the script, and then that director would go off the project. The next guy would come in. "Oh, I love this project. Let's rewrite the script." So they kept doing that. And then finally David Fincher came in, and apparently I read an interview recently. I wasn't clear on how this happened. Apparently Andrew Kevin Walker sent him the wrong script. He sent him the earliest, the first version with the head in the box. And Fincher loved it, and they went together and fought with the producers in the studio to get it made. And my understanding, if I recall, is Morgan Freeman is actually the reason why the movie got made the way it did. Because at some point, Morgan Freeman came forward and said, "Look, if you don't make it with that ending with the head in the box, I'm gone. I'm walking." And so that did it. But I got to meet him. I got to meet his brother. They were very nice. And I just heard him talk, and I waited around. And, these people are normal people. I mean, they're not gods, and people idealize them. And, I know who that guy is. I know his name. I've seen that actor on TV. Well, when you really meet them, they're just regular people. Some of them act like they're not regular people. Some of them act like regular people. Most of them want to be treated like anybody else. They don't want to be, they've had enough of that. Some of them aren't that way. Some of them have huge egos. A lot of them just want to be left alone and treated like anybody else. So I waited in a very short line because people were afraid to approach them, and went up and got to talk with them for, it wasn't long, maybe 5 minutes, but got pictures with them too. And so
Mike, is there
what's the saying? The essay, fortune favors the bold, right?
Yeah. There's also what's the SAS saying?
Yeah, that's what I was going for. The SAS. I don't remember if it's fortune favors the bold. It's something like that.
Yeah, I forget what that actually is, but it's very similar to that. But is there any screenwriters you haven't met yet, Mike, that you really wanted to meet?
Oh, I suppose there are a lot of great writers and a lot of great screenplays out there. My favorites, just like you, Shane Black and Andrew Kevin Walker, Terry Rossio. It's just amazing to meet them all in one trip. Just amazing. But I don't know if I really have an answer to that. One of the shocking movies for me of the year that didn't get a lot of press and play, it was Fences. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, I've seen Fences.
Yeah, the acting is terrific. The dialogue is wonderful. It's a beautifully made film. It's a very simple film, but the acting, the quality of the acting and the writing, the dialogue will just draw you in. I couldn't turn the damn thing off. I sat down and started watching it. I had places to go, people to see, I had things to do. I had no intention of watching the movie, and I sat there with my jaw dropped. Found out I'd been standing there 15 minutes with the remote in my hand, watching this thing. My daughter got it as a SAG screener, and came in, and that's probably acting-wise and script-wise probably the best film I've seen this year. I don't know what it's going to do at the Oscars. I suspect Denzel Washington will probably win Best Actor. Viola Davis certainly should be in the running for Best Actress. I don't know that she had enough screen time for it, but Denzel certainly should win. And, that movie, as I said with Deadpool with the opening, that movie is worth the price of admission. If you only watch the first scene where Denzel Washington is talking about death, the scene is so mind-blowingly great that the whole movie is worth watching just for that one scene. And, it doesn't stop there. So I can't really say, any one particular writer. A number of the writers that I'd like to meet are dead. So, that's kind of a bummer, but
as we're talking about, Fences, I thought it was phenomenal as well. I think, Denzel stole the show in that movie. He just plays that charismatic, tragic hero. Obviously, because there's a lot of regret in that man's life, in that character's life. And, as he's sort of talking to everybody in one way or another sees him at his best, sees him at his worst, and it's sort of at one way or another also at the butt end of his worst. And, his son, he talks to his one son the one way, his other son, he constantly wants more from him, and he doesn't go about it the right way. And, it's just a phenomenal movie.
Yeah, because he wants to make the changes he couldn't make himself in his own life, have his son live those, and also excel as he did, the way he did, because he's getting older and he sees his own mortality, which we know from talking about death. So he wants to live vicariously through his son also. It's just an absolutely phenomenal movie. I'll probably watch it again when we get off the phone. Wonderful film. I don't know if it got enough circulation buzz, the box office to win Oscars. What the Oscars people pick frequently isn't anything near what I think is the best, and other people agree with that. But that's terrific writing. The dialogue is phenomenal. And
yeah.
So,
And it's almost a self-contained movie because a lot of it happens in that one house. And I wanted to ask you too about your screenplay for The Grocer, because that's completely contained, self-contained screenplay, and that won third place in the London Film Awards, correct?
Yeah, it won third. It's won a bunch of awards. It just took third at London. It's in the running in another contest. It just made another cut. The Grocer is completely contained. It's 100% contained. It has one location, the entire screenplay. There are some movies that try to do that. It's very difficult to do it and carry it off with a very entertaining movie, because a one location screenplay is going to be very dialogue heavy. It has to be, unless you do something completely avant-garde and have a bunch of people sitting in a room watching paint dry or ants crawl around. Some experimental thing. A la Eraserhead meets Salvador Dali or something like that. You're going to tend to be dialogue heavy. Needles is 97% one location, which is a desert saloon, which may or may not be in Needles, California, in the Mojave Desert. It's actually purgatory, but appears otherwise. And it has only two other locations that occur as flashbacks. One is a very brief flashback to Golgotha, and it's I think a quarter page, and the other flashback is like a Pacific Northwest rainy mountain winding road, and that's it. So 97% contained. Grocer's 100% contained. The entire story happens at a grocery store in its parking lot. That's it. One location for the whole thing. And of course, you hear all the time, that's what everybody's looking for, is one location. You bring the cast and crew in, you set the date, you get everything set up, and you never have to move anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You look at a movie like Spy Game, for example, which I love. They have, Hong Kong. They have, settings in Vietnam, Langley, Virginia, China, coastal China. It's a Tony Scott, big bang, big budget, big stars, and it goes all over the world. The Bourne films do that too. Those are very expensive to make. And a lot of the places where films like that want to film, like the Middle East, these are not stable places where you can just go set up a camera crew. This is covered in Argo. It's no secret. There are a lot of places you can't film, and you have to try and mimic, find another location that works. Then you have to, if you're not filming where they are, you have to build sets that make it look like you're really there, and things like that. Bridge of Spies, they had to they're showing Berlin being divided east and west, the communists and the democracy, and they got the wall being built right down the middle of the city. I mean, that's all an incredibly expensive scene to film. I turned to my wife. I've seen it many times. She hadn't. I turned to her last night. We watched again. I watched it again. She watched it, and I said, imagine the cost of this scene. How many people are there? All the soldiers in uniforms, as far as the eye can see, and it's just very, very expensive. Well, a contained screenplay does the exact opposite of that. It minimizes your actors. It minimizes your locations to minimalist, as low as you can get, one location. Now, there's even an extreme on contained screenplays. If you look at Ryan Reynolds' Buried, essentially the whole movie happens with him in a coffin.
Mm-hmm.
That's as contained as you can get. You're in a coffin, okay? So, but anyway, that's considered a very desirable thing these days. Hopefully somebody will hear this and ask to read the script and buy one of those scripts. I keep having people rave, man, this needs to get made. Well, I agree with you. Let's sell the screenplay. Contact my manager. We can make a deal. But that's also a smart way to start off for writers that want to learn to develop character and get kind of befuddled or thrown off by changing locations. There are always posts in my group, oh, what do I do? How do I move the camera? I have a camera, in a bedroom shooting out the window at stuff happening outside. How do I write that? A lot of people get hung up on all that, and that's all formatting. A lot of people get hung up on that stuff. If you have a single location, you can concentrate much more on character, can't you?
Yeah, that's very true. And
so, look, like Fences, you mentioned, Fences was a play.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the movie feels like a play when you watch it, very much. Samuel Beckett, Theater of the Absurd, he had a play that was I think half a page or a quarter of a page. He has plays where the entire play there are two people in trash cans talking to each other. You talk about dialogue heavy. You talk about illusions. You need to get an encyclopedia out, and people said this about needles. You need to get an encyclopedia out to understand everything going on because it's so deep with illusions because, they've got to talk or it's going to just be two people with their heads sticking out of trash cans, the whole thing. Beckett has somebody buried up to their neck in sand. The whole play is one character buried up to their neck in sand. All you see is their head. That's minimalist, okay? Well, that's what you shoot for. Maybe not that extreme, because it's very hard for something like that to be entertaining. You have to be a master to pull that off. But what you want to do, if you're starting out, is pick a setting that you don't move from, work on developing and deepening and broadening your characters, and examining the moral challenges, the philosophical ideals they have as they deal with whatever situation you're creating, and go ahead and develop the characters and worry more about that than jumping all around in like a Bourne. There's nothing wrong with the Bourne films, but jumping around, elevators and trams and planes and going all over the place. Concentrate on the character and build and develop the character. There's a play on Broadway called Blackbird, and it's a nasty subject matter. It's a child molestation and stuff like that. But it basically has Erica was up for a role in that. I was playing, I think, 155 shows at the Belasco Theater. It was Michelle Williams and Jeff Daniels, and they were going to make it 3, Erica Bierman, and she actually got the preliminary offer on that. We were waiting for the final contract to come through, and the director wrote the little tiny part out at the end. So they went with a cast of 2. The whole play is a cast of 2 for whatever the length of a full-length Broadway play is, and it is a woman grown to, I don't need to go into this too much, but basically it's a woman grown to womanhood who was basically a child, young adolescent when she was entered into a sexual relationship with a guy. It's not like forcible rape, but it's statutory rape, and he ends up, living his life and having a family and a business, and she actually shows up at his business years later and confronts him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so very, very intense, very dialogue-driven, character-driven, and very contained. You've got something that has more than one location. It does have more than one location, but the vast majority of it is one location. And so that's the kind of thing that for a play or for a film cuts your costs down dramatically. And that is what has recently, of late, been in demand. And you hear people screaming all the time, I want contained screenplays. So that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's something that I try to do as well, Mike. And the way I tried to do it was I wrote 3 screenplays at a summer camp. I called it my camp trilogy.
Wow, that's great.
And so that way, it's kind of sort of like Friday the 13th in a way, because they're always going to be at this camp. We're not really, there's no big set pieces, you know what I mean? And it can be done, where horror is sort of the main character, and you don't have to, go out and get, A-list actors. You could just, have
that horror is very profitable. They can be made for not a lot of money, and if you're getting into contained horror where you got very few locations, that should be very desirable material. If it's written well, it should be very marketable.
Yeah. So I've actually pitched a few of them, and Well, that's a whole nother story altogether, Mike. But just going back to Buried, I agree. I actually knew what the whole concept was going in, and I always wondered how are they going to carry this for the whole movie. I was pleasantly surprised at how they carried that throughout the whole movie and adding different things.
Well, his acting, in Deadpool, it's full of all kinds of self-deprecating humor, of course, and Ryan Reynolds says at one point, Ryan Reynolds made it this far in his superior acting method, talking about he's a good-looking guy. Okay, well, in Buried, he acted the hell out of it. Mm-hmm. You're not the best-looking guy in the world with a blue light, low wattage blue light in a coffin. The whole screenplay that was carried by his acting. He killed it. He did a beautiful job acting. So. It needed a strong actor to pull off. You put somebody who's just a pretty face in the box who can't act, and you got a flop, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
But Ryan Reynolds happens to be a pretty face, and he also can act, and he ended up nailing that. And yes, it was engrossing from beginning to end. Another film that I expected. I watched it for the novelty, which I suspect you did too. Knowing what it was going in, saying, there's no way they could pull this off. And then found myself very, very entertained in watching the whole movie. And that's a great example of a successful, contained, almost completely contained. There are some other locations, but not much. I think maybe 3 locations, the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's just also I made sure to go out and get the screenplay because Scott Myers from GoInToStory.com, he was always mentioning it, and I made sure to go check out his posts about it where he dissected the whole movie, and I was blown away again, how they were able to do that, and the way they did it obviously is they raised the stakes, constantly adding in new twists and turns. He has, well, I probably shouldn't go into it because in case anybody hasn't seen it yet. But it always raises those stakes.
It's kind of old to worry about spoilers now. But I mean, yeah, the one thing goes wrong, and then the next thing goes wrong. His light starts running out. I mean, it just goes from one thing to the next, and that's what you have to do in a screenplay. You need to keep raising the tension. One of my criticisms of Manchester by the Sea is I just never felt the stakes were that high. And it just didn't feel like it was increasing tension. It's a very stately paced piece. Casey Affleck did a fine job acting. So did the others. But it's not a short movie. And it just moves along at a very, very stately pace. I like the film. It wasn't my favorite film of the year by far. I suspect the Academy will like it. It has kind of a downer ending for them. But it's a film that's a good example of one where I didn't feel that they kept raising the stakes. They didn't have sufficient stakes. Now, to give you an idea of what the effect of that is, my wife fell asleep 4 or 5 times trying to watch the movie. We got in a huge fight because I said, now's the time. Let's watch Manchester by the Sea. No, I'm not watching that thing. I can't stay awake. I said, no. You really will get in it. It'll have an interesting emotional impact on you, and you'll get very particular feeling. And I want to talk to you about it. So, let's drink some coffee and let's sit up and watch this thing. I've watched it 4 times. I like it more each time I watch it, and that's how. One of the ways that I learn to write well is by watching movies. Okay, I don't. It'll probably surprise you, and I do not recommend this for most people. I read very few screenplays by other writers. I don't go read all the Oscar-winning screenplays that are pending. I don't do it. I watch the movies and I absorb it that way. Is there a reason to read the screenplays? Absolutely. Most screenwriters do, and I strongly recommend that people start out that way. I don't think I've read more than 5 prose scripts on produced movies. I just don't read them. I'll watch the movie. There is a reason, if only to see the differences in execution and planning. There's a great reason, looking at the spec or the shooting script, and then what they actually got can be a very rewarding and instructive experience. It's just not something I do. That's me personally, which again shows you that, you know, there are different ways to do things and still do well and get to the end point where you want to be. There are pro writers I know that read every single script for Academy Award scripts. They read every single script for every blockbuster that comes out. I don't do that. I would rather write natively without, I'm not going to say copying, but, you know, just my own way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, Mike. I like to. I have a whole collection of screenplays, and you know, I always find that my favorite person to write screenplays and my favorite author is Quentin Tarantino. I just love the way he writes. I think it's entertaining, and I also feel though that I also can pull from the movie. So if I, like for instance, I have the screenplay for Hell or High Water, but I actually saw the movie about 3 days ago before I actually read the screenplay. And I like the movie, you know, just as well, and I will probably end up reading the screenplay as well, just to see what the differences are. But I really enjoyed the Hell or High Water. Have you seen that yet?
Yes, and for, you know, I don't want to say anything bad about Quentin. He has movies that I absolutely love that are wonderful films, and he's a groundbreaking guy. I will say he overwrites, and you know, if you look at the screenplay for Hateful Eight, is I don't like the film, and you know, the screenplay's 189 pages or somewhere thereabouts, and a lot of people I talk with think he could have cut an hour out of that movie. But he's also written some just, you know, some phenomenal stuff, you know, Inglourious Basterds, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. I mean, it's great stuff. He's another one, though. He's an outlier. He's very, very smart. He's very gifted. He still writes screenplays out longhand in a square deal notebook. Okay, so he's a different kind of guy, and he's made his own path. He's not somebody that I would emulate writing because there are a lot of people that try and they just don't get away with it. They can't pull it off. He's a very difficult guy to try and copy, not copy like rip off, but to try and emulate his style. He's a really difficult guy to do that on. You know, there are it'd be like trying to write poetry like E.E. Cummings. You know, me up it does out of the floor, quietly stare, a poisoned mouse, and now I lose it. Who asks, you know, what have I done you wouldn't have? Okay, all in lowercase, no punctuation. You know, Cormac McCarthy, same thing. Go read James Joyce. You know, go read one of the Cormac McCarthy books. And, you know, where's the punctuation? Did the printer lose all the periods and commas? And you know, there isn't any. So why can he do that? Well, he blazed his own way, and he's phenomenal. Okay, so you know, do you want to go be the next Cormac McCarthy and go turn a book into your publisher that has no punctuation marks? Probably not a good idea. It's just like copying Shane Black. There's a conversation in my screenwriting group brought up by a pro this morning, about how a producer wanted him to add back a bunch of unshootable commentary into the script that didn't have any. Well, traditional wisdom says, and I wrote a post going in my book, on Sally Bigfoot. I write this big scenario about Sally Bigfoot and her family, okay, about unshootable garbage in somebody's head that you can read on the page, and then what ends up there. So I write this big, long thing about Sally Bigfoot, and it's like a page and a half long, and then what somebody could actually shoot from that script is like 5 words, 1 line long, because none of the rest is shootable. Okay? Well, there was just this conversation that strangely a producer was asking this professional, multi-produced guy, novelist. I'm not going to name him here now for certain reasons, but this guy has multiple films out, and he turned in a nice, tight, lean script. He's an action writer, and the producer said, this is crap. What are you giving me? I'm not saying he said it's crap. Okay? He said, I'm not happy with this. What are you doing here? I want a bunch of commentary and other stuff, built around here. And he said, well, you can't film any of that. And he said, yeah, that's great. It's the exact opposite of traditional wisdom. Okay? He's being asked to write stuff into the script to make it longer, to entertain the reader, and to try and get a particular A-list actor, I can't mention, who they think they can lure in with this particular technique by writing a bunch of stuff that they will never be able to film, that will not change the film script one bit, but that they want in there. Now, the producer's the boss. If your producer tells you to do that, then you do it. And that's the right answer for that project. And this is why, rules are made to be broken.
Yeah.
Quentin Tarantino broke the rules. Shane Black broke the rules. Cormac McCarthy broke the rules. E.E. Cummings broke the rules. James Joyce broke the rules. There's a guy I can't remember his name, which is sad, who wrote a novel. It's also in my book called Gadsby, I think it's called. And this writer, sadly, again, I can't remember his name, but he wrote an entire novel, 50,000 words, without using the letter E in the whole book.
So it's not The Great Gatsby, it's just Gatsby?
No, it's Gadsby.
Oh, Gadsby. Oh, okay.
It's like Gadsby. So he managed to write an entire novel without using the letter E in any word inside the covers. It appears on the cover as they describe what he's done, because if you use the word novel, it is an E, obviously. So, when they say, oh, this guy wrote a novel without the letter E, well, then you've used several E's, haven't you, on the cover. But if you go to the actual story itself inside, nowhere does the letter E appear. Now, you talk about writer's block, and that's what my essay was about. Next time you think you have writer's block, I've written a number of these. Look at what Lucretius wrote, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, this epic poem that this guy wrote, in a toga in a cave with a candle using squid ink and a feather pen, and the type of Einsteinian physics and philosophy, the incredible deep thinking this guy did under these conditions. Abraham Lincoln studied law by candle. Okay, that's tough. Okay, well, this guy did it, in like 54 B.C., writing in squid ink, and he's talking about where the universe ends. I mean, really? So you want to talk about writer's block and do something that's a remarkable achievement, but certainly less than that. Look at this Gadsby book, and again, it's going to be in my book, but the guy writes a whole novel without the letter E. So next time you think you have writer's block, imagine writing a novel without using one of the letters of the alphabet, a vowel.
Yeah, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well. I actually, I'm going to about that novel too, Mike, because that is. I don't know
I'll get you the info on him.
Well, I was going to look it up too when I put it in the show notes, because I don't know if that's an exercise in bravery or it just in complete madness. Maybe both, right? But
I think it's brave, and it's also stubborn. I mean, you've got to be. Let me see if I can find it for you. You've got to be mentally tough to. It's Gadsby, Gadsby, 1939, by Ernest Vincent Wright, with Wright. Now, the sad thing is, nobody remembers this guy's name, Ernest Vincent Wright. So did he take a gamble? You bet he did. He turned a novel into his publisher with no E's in it. That's a gamble, okay? And did his gamble pay off? I don't know. What's a payoff? His book got published. You can still read the book today. It's a novelty item. You can go look it up and say, holy smokes, how'd this guy do this? And go skim the text. And it doesn't read like a traditional book because he can't use the word E. He's got to write in very strange, circuitous routes to avoid using E's. Was he a success? I don't know. I couldn't remember his name, and I'm a writer. His family didn't renew his copyright.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, none of his heirs, after he died, none of his copyright ran. None of his heirs cared enough to pay the copyright fees to re-up the novel.
Jesus,
that's
That's amazing. We were talking about copyright stuff, and one of the things that you mentioned too in the group, as we talk about copywriting, was about about the WGA and also about the U.S. Patent Office, the Copyright Office, and I mean all of that is really good stuff. And when I hear stuff like this happen,
Thanks.
Because when I hear stuff like this happen, or where I hear stuff like what happened with George Romero and the original Night of the Living Dead, I mean, you realize just how important all this stuff is.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Most, my book will help with that. Shamelessly plugging the book yet again, but I mean, I'm involved in a project where they had some issues because somebody tried to steal the project. There are other in a year or so in my group, I used to have them written down, something like between 9 and a dozen stolen scripts where people have actually come in and said, my script got stolen, and actually had some kind of substantial evidence and significant data and story behind it, not just like, oh, I wrote a script and, oh, damn that Star Wars, they stole my script. No, nothing like that. Like actual matching dialogue, and I've had it happen. I've had it happen to me. I won't say who. I had another writer take some stuff from one of my scripts, and there are, in a group of less than 3,000 people, and it wasn't 3,000 the whole time. The group started at one, me. It's not advertised, and I reject about 90% of applicants. But in that small group, in 1 year, we've got somewhere approaching a dozen stolen scripts where someone ripped off somebody else's work. And there are trolls that go in these groups. That's why I vet people. I'm very careful about this. There are trolls that go in groups, and they'll say, producer looking for someone to write our story, and we need you to submit 10 pages. Well, what they do is, and then we'll judge and we'll pick who's going to get the writing assignment. Well, Dave, who gets the writing assignment? Tell me. No one gets the writing assignment. They assign the 10 pages. That say it's a 100-page screenplay, so that's 10 10-page divisions. They assign it to 20 writers. Mm-hmm. So they put up an ad in the group for no money. This is you have to prove to us who you are. You're going to write 10 pages. We'll tell you what to write, and then we'll get back to you if we like it. Well, keep holding your breath. We'll call you Blue Boy. You'll be in the corner turning blue because they're never going to call you, no matter how good you were. Because what's going to happen? They don't have any money, and what's going to happen is they're not really looking to hire a writer. They're looking to steal writing. So they give 10 scenes they want written, 10 pages, kind of a simplistic example, but I'm making it easy for the math. 100-page script, they divide it into 10 segments, however many scenes each. Scripts typically 60, 80 scenes, but let's stick with this example. So, you're going to write these 10 pages for us, and they give the same 10 pages to two writers. Then they take the next, 11 to 20, and they give that to two more writers, and they do the same thing all the way down the line. So they have 20 writers writing their 100-page script twice. So what they then do is they then pick through it all. They pick what they like, what they don't like. They throw it all together, and they have maybe even that guy rewrite the whole thing. The whole script's sitting there written for them. They just rewrite it, pick what they like, that guy had a great idea. Well, we'll keep that. We're screwing him, so why not keep it? And then they get the whole script written for them that only needs a rewrite, and they pay nothing. And, these people are unscrupulous. This happens all the time in writing groups. Send me a writing sample. Send me 10 pages of my original script. Here's the story. You give me the first 10 pages. So, those are all pitfalls. Not copywriting. You want to register with WGA, you got an extra $20? Sure. Register with WGA. Is your script copyright protected? Absolutely not. WGA serves a lot of good functions. The script registry does not take the place of copyright. It works as some evidence of when something was created, not a copyright. Don't even get into federal court with a WGA registration on a copyright case. So, beginning writers need to learn that kind of stuff. And a lot of it's counterintuitive. A lot of it, people aren't going to tell you. They don't know. There's a lot of terrible information. I'll do it here. I'll kill the poor man's copyright for you. Poor man's copyright. Write your script, fold it up, seal it up really well in an envelope, and mail it to yourself. And now you're protected, right? No, absolutely not. Does nothing. It's never protected anybody in any court that I can name or that anyone I know can name. It's absolutely worthless. And yet this myth of the poor man's copyright persists. These are things that you need to learn. And books like Dave Trottier's Screenwriter's Bible and others will address some of this stuff for you. So you think you're going to be a screenwriter? Spend $20, buy a book, read it.
Yeah.
Learn something.
Yeah.
And I get into arguments. With people in my group. I'm a lawyer, and they want to argue with me about the law. They tell me I'm wrong. I had somebody do it a couple days ago. Somebody asked a question that ran into legal territory, and didn't ask it to me. Just threw it up in the group. And I'm not this person's lawyer, but I can throw out general legal advice to writers and stuff. So I answered the question, and she's like contradicting my answer with the complete wrong answer. So I tried to gently guide her back, and no, look at it, it's really this way. And she told me I was wrong. So, you really, writers need to have a basic understanding of certain things just to survive and be viable. The writing is a strange occupation. You have to be able to actually write stuff, but then there's the business end of writing, which is completely different from the creation end of writing. And again, like David Trottier's book and other books, they actually will talk about both. And Linda Aronson's book talks about completely story theory and structure and plotting. That's the whole book. Genius book. Rick Toscan's book talks about playwriting seminars too. He talks a lot about the business and is a very practical guide. He analyzes plays. He bridges the gap between playwriting and screenwriting, and then he talks about the business of, okay, you're sitting in your room over your garage in Kennesaw, Georgia, churning out this stuff. Isn't it great? Oh, you love it. And what are you going to do with it? No one's ever going to read it if it doesn't leave the garage, right?
Yeah, very true.
So there's a business end. And if let's say you're an idiot savant, let's say you're, a beautiful mind, you're this gifted mathematician, or, if this guy was in a cave in Afghanistan scribbling the most brilliant mathematics anyone had ever seen all over the cave walls, using, burnt bone and scratching with a bone and, highlighting with a piece of ashed out stick and a little blood dot here and there, no one's ever going to see it, right?
Yeah,
so the most brilliant mathematician in the world, no one knows who he is. He ends up, he demises, and then, 3,000 years later, someone finds his cave art and recognizes his high-level mathematics, which is wonderful, and, everyone else, all the uninformed think it's cave art. Look at this. Ooh, let's add some fags to this, right? And they're modifying the formulas. Okay, so, there's a business end to this, too. Unless you're going to be a pure hobbyist and just write this stuff for your wife, your spouse, your grandma, your dad, your mom. Oh, look how great this is. Give it to your kids. There needs to be a goal, and that's the business end. And so, like the books, like I said, Playwriting Seminars 2.0, and the Screenwriter's Guide, the Screenwriter's Bible, those are books that discuss the business end as well. Okay, books like Aronson's is focused all on structure and plot and story function, character function, and all of those things to an extreme depth, like biblical depth. It's that in depth, but it really doesn't. There's some in there, but it really doesn't approach the business as much. Your Cut To is Showing by T.J. Alex, I recommend. I think there's a little business in there too, but that's not why I go to that book. So, you need to learn, you need to learn the business stuff too, and that bridges a nice gap to contests, which you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah, and one thing I want to ask, Mike, is have you ever, I mean, I wanted to obviously ask this because, we're talking about books again. Have you ever read any of the big 3 or 4 books that sort of come across, everyone sort of comes across them? And those books, obviously, Screenplay by Sid Field, Save the Cat, Story. Have you read any of those books?
Let me be as fair as I can be. I read Save the Cat. Save the Cat is an approach. It's extremely formulaic. You need to know it because a lot of studio execs will be expecting, Save the Cat story beats, and they'll go to, page 67 of your script, page 12 of your script, page, 24 of your script, page 5 of your script, and they're going to be looking for Save the Cat story beats that Blake Snyder, by all reports, a wonderful guy who died young. It's a shame. Supposed to be a great guy, and he wrote 2 of the worst movies ever written. Blank Check or Shoot, Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot, which could have torpedoed Sylvester Stallone's career. He dodged a bullet on that one. So, that book was an analysis done by Snyder over a great deal of time, looking for a formula, a common theme, a thread running through the most successful and admired movies. And he distilled it down into a formula, just like a logline formula. It distills everything down, and you start plugging your stuff in to get a good logline. Well, at some point, not every film has a logline you can write with a standard logline formula. Once you understand what you're trying to accomplish, you may want to vary from the formula for a particular project because you may not be able to capture the logline well in 25 words written, so-and-so must do this, or and beat such and such villain, or this will happen, blah, blah, okay. So that may not be the best approach for a movie that you're working on. And so, yeah, I've read Save the Cat. I think Save the Cat tends to put writers in a box, and it makes you stick to story beats that people pull their hair out. Oh, my God, I added a scene in my Save the Cat moment, my Dark Night of the Soul moment moved, and now it's 4 pages past where it's supposed to be. Oh my God, I'm going to jump off the roof. No, tell your story. Tell your story, and learn what Save the Cat is in case you have somebody that really wants the beats to line up and you're writing for them. Well, then maybe you've got to break out Save the Cat. As far as the other ones, Sid Field and all, I've started to read some of them. I find a lot of their stuff, yes, they're acknowledged experts. Yes, they're much better known than I am, of course. I'm just a guy, they're famous. Well, a lot of their stuff is very philosophical and kind of hard to put your finger on exactly what they're saying and how do I apply this to my script. So, I looked at some of that stuff and didn't find it immediately helpful. So I ignored it. I taught myself. And that's there are conventions, there are rules, and once you learn them, you can also learn to break them and get away with it if you know what you're doing. And as far as those guys go, some of the most well-read writers, screenwriters I know that have read every single one of those books, that can quote you from the books and tell you what page number it is on, they've never written a good script. Mm-hmm. There was one guy in my group who's no longer a member. He's an antisocial guy, threw him out, but that's an aside. And he just incredible knowledge on all these writers, theories, and McKee and Sid Field and every other theoretical theoretician on storytelling. And by the way, Aronson also is big on that, except she wrote a book that's a very practical nuts and bolts guide that is it's not all just theory, it's loaded with theory, but it gives you guidelines to actually fix the engine, okay? They tell you how to build the engine, tell you what the engine is, and then it'll let you put the engine together. A lot of these guys will say, let's talk about an engine, and, before long you're sitting there in a yoga position staring out at a little plant growing by itself in the desert, okay? Like Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, right?
Yeah.
So, there's practical and there's impractical, and there are people that write all kinds of great stuff. And I'm not knocking these great, well-known philosophical guys like McKee and Field. I haven't read them. Mm-hmm. I've skimmed little bits of them and said, you know what? This isn't answering my question, or this isn't for me. Yeah. And maybe for you. I'm not saying it isn't for you. It could well be for you. My book isn't going to be for everybody. That's for damn sure. So, find your approach that works and stick to it. But the guy that I was talking about a minute ago, he bloviated endlessly in the group, and everyone, this guy knows everything. Oh my God, he's the best expert anywhere. And he really did know a lot. It was incredibly impressive. And then one day he came in the group and he said, I've been doing this 20 years and I've never finished a script. Can you guys help me? I'm not kidding. I could show you the post.
I mean,
so this guy could quote you chapter and verse from Sid Field McKee, from any, but the hero's journey, all the different theories and story methods of writing, and there are a lot of different people that have, the 237 steps of the hero and all these other approaches. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those. They may be the best thing ever for you, but they may not work for me. You got to find what works for you. And so this guy could tell you what anybody wrote about anything very convincingly, and 6 months later you find out the guy has never finished a script.
I mean, yeah, that's. I wonder, it's almost like a fear of failure to start or something. I mean, but then again, 20 years. I mean, wow. I mean, that is just. Maybe he just. I don't know. Maybe he's got a ton of screenplays started but never actually finished, or maybe even never even started one.
Well, one screenplay worked on over 10 years, never finished it. I knocked out a rewrite in 5 days that was accepted. 99 out of 100 pages were accepted first pass. I got some notes. They said, we want to change a couple things on this one page. That may cascade into something else. Can you do that for us? I said, sure. I rewrote it in about 10 minutes. I spent about 12 hours rereading the script, thinking about everything, making sure that I wasn't setting myself up for a jackpot, a story hole, a continuity error. Couldn't figure out anything that was affected by this in any way, and went ahead and turned it in, and they said, oh my God, we love it, you're done.
Yeah, I once knew a guy, Mike, he couldn't write 10 pages in 3 months. And and he wanted to be a screenwriter, and I said, you got to turn in 3 or 10 pages, at least 10 pages, and I gave him 3 months to do it. And because each month I would check back in, because that's what you had to do to join the one writers group, was that you had to actually have written something. And I said, just show us something. I said, write 10 pages. And the first month I didn't do it. My wife and I had too much.
Every excuse in the world.
You got it. And then in the second month, another excuse. Third month, and finally I said, I don't think your heart is into this. I think your brain is. I think you want that. Right. That notoriety, and you want me.
That guy's not a writer.
Exactly. And
I have a whole post on this. I have a whole post on staring at the blank page and being able to put anything. Fucking commit. Write something. You're not a writer if you don't write. So I have a whole essay on this that people found very useful, and with 7 or 8 different bullet points about what is really going to happen in your life. What is going to go wrong if you write a piece of shit? What is really going to happen to you? If you sit there and you hack away at your keyboard and you write just a piece of roadkill that a dog wouldn't eat, guess what? Nothing happens. You can rewrite it. You could start over. 3 years later, after you've written 2 good ones, you'll laugh at your first one, and maybe you'll have ideas to go back and fix it. But that fear of writing, like I said, I wrote a whole essay on this. It was very well received. It'd be in the book. Fear of writing. If you don't put it down on the page, the one thing I guarantee you is you will never get anywhere. If you don't actually commit to write, you will never accomplish anything.
Mike, that is so true. And, Mike, we've been talking for about an hour and 45 minutes now.
Wow, I haven't even kept track.
Yeah, I have a timer right in front of me of how long every. But that's the only reason I know. Mike, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you've got a million things going on as well. So Mike, in closing, I just want to ask you one final question. Is there anything that we didn't sort of talk about that you wanted to get a chance to, or is there anything that you wanted to say to sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
Yeah, every writer's different. What works for me works for me. That's a good place to start to look at, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. If you find a method that works for you, no matter how many people tell you it's wrong, if your work product is good, it doesn't matter how you get there. As long as you're not stealing it, do whatever works for you. Learn the rules, the conventions of the trade. Some of them, people can't even say why it's done that way. It's just done that way. Some of the rules you're going to not be able to break, and some of the rules you will be able to break. When anyone tells you absolutely, oh, this is wrong, that's wrong, absolutes usually don't work. Learn a way to write that works for you and use that method. It probably won't work for me. Mine may not work for you. But there isn't necessarily a right way or wrong way. You need to get a high-quality finished product out. If you stand on your head and gibber and shriek and write upside down left-handed and that gets it done, go for it. That's what you need to do. And you need to write. A lot of people say write every day, write 3 pages every day. You have to or you're not a writer. Well, I'm not a writer. I don't write every day. I write every day in my group, but as far as writing content, I don't. So that's another rule. Writers write every day. Well, some writers write every day. There are plenty of writers that don't. I write when I'm inspired, when I have great ideas, when I'm on an assignment. If I don't have anything going on, I don't feel like writing, and I sit down to write, I'm going to write crap. Right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm not inspired. I'm not motivated. I have no direction. Then, without a goal, I'm just going to meander along and write a bunch of forgettable stuff that will end up in a folder that I just wasted a day. Instead, focus before you start to write. A common writer's error is a new writer has no idea what they have to say, what their voice is, why they're writing. You need to try and discover your own voice and figure out what it is you want to say. You need to have something to say when you sit down to write. I'll close on that.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. Mike, where can people find you out online? Sorry, I know I said that was the last question, but this is the last question. Where can people find you out online? My information's up on IMDb under Michael E. Bierman. Most of my projects are in development, which means unless you have Pro, you can't see them, but there's plenty there. My contact information's there. I can also be reached through the Facebook group Screenwriters Who Can Actually Write. If you're going to apply, I do vet people. I do not let people, unless they're celebrities and they contact me separately, which has happened a few times, I don't let people in using false names because deals are made in the group. Contracts form, you need to use your real name. And you need to show interest in writing. If I pull up your profile, it's got a bunch of stuff about playing on the Xbox and what's your favorite whiskey and what's your favorite color Furby, you're probably not getting into the group. So those are a couple ways to find me, and my email's online at IMDb. And everyone, I will link to all of that in the show notes. And again, I just want to say that Mike's group is phenomenal. It is the best screenwriting group that I'm aware of on Facebook, and it is just everybody in there is always doing awesome things, and that's sort of what I always wanted from a screenwriters group, is people actually doing things. There's actually like 3 screenwriting groups I'm a part of on Facebook, and finally, they're great. They're yours, Mike. Screenwriting U has one, and Scott Myers Going to Story is another, and those 3.
Sure, he's great. He's a Facebook friend of mine. I don't really know him very well, but he's great. No question about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say those 3 are what actually keep me on Facebook, because otherwise I'd just be like, there's nothing really keeping me here.
And one final thought, shameless plug. You can look for my daughter and look for me. I'm finishing with co-writer, co-producer Ramsey Stoneburner. exec producer Guy Francisco Poland and associate producer Craig Tallis. We're working on a feature film called The Shoes, which we've finished shooting about 2/3 of it. We've just added an A-list person, and we're going to be finishing that up in the next couple months. So got a couple films in development, but that one is one that is directly, at least partially, under my control.
Oh, awesome. Fantastic, Mike. And, I look forward to seeing, everything you're up to, and I know we'll be talking in the group. And everybody, DaveBullis.com, Twitter, it's at Dave_Bullis. Michael E. Bierman. There, I finally got it out. I have a head cold, by the way. That's why I sound so terrible. But
you sound great. No idea.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's why I'm having some trouble talking. I can't really breathe through my nose too well. But it's been a pleasure having you on, Mike. And I want to say thank you so much. And again, I will be talking to you very, very soon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did, my friend. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.